in advance and then stream it, so I can send it and just look my stream. I don't know how to do that. Probably I somehow connected YouTube to Zoom, which is standard, but then it just makes on something on my channel, which I can obtain link and send out. What? Yeah, yeah. See, there is this delay of like some 10 or 20 seconds between YouTube and Zoom. But I think it may be useful for all of us, including myself at least. Yes. Yes. Okay. Now it's recorded. So that's about the demarcation problem, and as I say, no. Then of course there are this issue about, say, coronavirus, right? Which information is reliable, and what we should do. Should we vaccinate ourselves or not? No, by the way, I did, so I recommend everybody. And quite recently was very positive serious paper on the Sputnik vaccine. I don't know if you followed. About a week ago was in Lancet, and there was big paper in New York Times, by the way, which kind of independent of our internal sources, which actually kind of confirmed that it is good vaccine. Tomorrow I'm going to make a test for antibodies, so I can report how it really works. So far I just got these 2 doses, and I recommend to do that to everybody actually. If you
is it free, or
yes, it is free.
That?
No, it is free. It is free. I don't know what the situation is in terms of how say queue. I did it very early because I was afraid that it will be not that easily available. And you should check. I know in Moscow it works. I don't know exactly the situation in St. Petersburg, but I think if you really take initiative, you can do that, right? And I really recommend. By the way, my daughter, which is older daughter, she's living in UK, and then it's much more. So she cannot do that if she wants. She can do that only something in June, because they have a better, say, organized system of priorities and such things. So I think it's a really good idea to take initiative and do it as early as possible. Now, of course, you should check with the doctor. There is some check on the spot, but probably if you have some specific medical situation, then you probably need to contact your doctor. And, could be some reasons not to do it. Okay, yeah, it's just all for saying how terribly science is important. It's a little bit actually wider question than demarcation problem, because demarcation problem becomes important as far as you decide that science is reliable. No, it's what I believe. Somehow it should be reliable, right? There could be different views. Just saying that science is not somehow reliable in general, or there are probably, arguably, some more reliable or some alternative sources of knowledge. I'm not sure. Right. No, for one thing, I think probably it sounds, at least for myself, plausible that science is not the only source of knowledge, because some kind of knowledge we obtain. I know that my older daughter lives in London, for example, right? That's doesn't come from science, right? But I think it's quite reasonable, say, qualify as knowledge and call it knowledge, all right? Even if it doesn't come from science. So in that sense, we would not, I would not restrict all knowledge to scientific knowledge. But on the other hand, I would claim that science produces knowledge, and it's a very important source of knowledge is science. Yes. And then, of course, if you decide that, say, what you need to know about COVID-19 is actually you need some scientific knowledge for making, say, including your personal decisions. I think it's important, of course, that you somehow distinguish between what is science and what is not, right? And so that's what constitutes demarcation problem exactly. And that's actually a hard problem. I give you this for reading, this reference, this Plato Stanford Encyclopedia, which, by the way, is important source for many things. Let me maybe open and show you. If you, or probably some of you is already familiar with this encyclopedia, not? It's philosophical, but kind of very broadly philosophical. So there is a lot of useful information. Of course, for philosophy, you may say it doesn't cover some important sources and probably ideas even, and that kind of critique would come from this idea that I say philosophy is kind of internationally is badly organized, and so some people say that would just represent kind of American view on philosophy, which in a sense is right. So probably doesn't cover some, I don't know, French or Chinese or Russian sources. But on the other hand, it's still, I think, very, very useful, even if it has some limitation. Let me show you. Yeah, see, here there is, no, it's a bit kind of long. It's also actually begins with kind of, actually with healthcare, you see, just for explaining how medical science is important, environmental policies, education. For some reason, they also say something like journalism. No, I think they mean mostly scientific journal, and that's, by the way, a very important problem by itself, right? How scientific knowledge can be conveyed, say, to general public. That's also very interesting and important topic. Yes, so no, probably I probably leave it for you to read. It's kind of written a little bit, that's kind of academic style, but you can also check this encyclopedia for many things, right? For very different topics, not only that one. And but actually, rather than going exactly to this demarcation problem and question of science, of pseudoscience, I still would begin with something which, at least in my view, is even more fundamental, even if it's not philosophy of science per se, but rather philosophy per se. Yeah, and this is a concept of knowledge. So let's, even if scientific knowledge is not all knowledge, right? We assume that knowledge is an important ingredient of science, right? Science brings us knowledge. And so first thing, we need to understand what is knowledge, right? How we think about knowledge, including scientific knowledge. So that's the question I would like to start with, kind of serious, hardcore philosophical question. And no, perhaps I'll let you talk a little bit, right? So you certainly have some intuitions about that. So let's me ask you what you think is knowledge and what is not knowledge. Of course, it makes sense somehow distinguish again knowledge in something which looks like knowledge, right? But is not how we define, describe, recognize what is knowledge? Yeah, so that's my question. To
May I try?
yes, go ahead.
I think that the knowledge may be some representation of reality that can be proved by some experience.
Mhm. Yeah, it's not bad. Representation of reality which can be proved by experience. Hmm. Good, good, very good. No, of course, here there is some subtleties. For example, if we talk about mathematics, right, we may talk about mathematical knowledge, presumably, and mathematics has more involved relationship with experience, right? So how we prove theorems is not by referring to empirical data, right, but different ways. So no, but anyway, I think it's somehow it's very good intuition. At least if we may exclude mathematics for now, right? So that's yes. Okay, I'll let you talk, and after that, I will present you kind of standard accounts. Okay, so we begin just with discussion, and then as far as I have time, but maybe we continue next time. I thought it's 3 power the spares. It's so long, so that I didn't try to save time. But after all, yeah, we don't have much time left. No, anyway, I think we spent useful time today to talk. So yes, go ahead. Who else?
I would like to try.
Mhm.
So I would say that knowledge is it has some certain properties, scientific knowledge. I would say it's something coherent.
Coherent.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Then it's something what is agreed upon with. Like many people, many scientists checked it and they can't find some evidence against it. And I would say also something about methods. So it should not be something like, oh, I had like a dream or a vision, and then I claim that this is true, or something like clear intuition. There must be some like tangible proofs, some like, yeah, so it's something about methods, I think.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's my
Yes,
thinking.
thank you. Yes.
May I add to Kirill and Anna's opinions? I think that replication of the results of some experiments are important too. And I didn't hear well. Did Kirill said experiment or facts or experience? But
Experience.
I think
Mhm.
experience, yeah. But I think it's again, if we talk about scientific knowledge, that it should be experiment, and we can a replication of this in many places of some results.
Yeah, that's very interesting, important issue. No, except of course this issue of replication. So in a sense, is really fundamental. But just think about no, first of all, historical knowledge. Again, history is not a science exact, right? But I think that's certainly knowledge, right? Knowledge of history, and I think everything was said like about evidence applies in history, right? About proofs, but replication is probably should be somehow understood in some special sense. I don't know. I think it's still relevant even to history in the sense that every new generation, so to speak, should replicate evidences at least somehow, right? But it's not that kind of replication that we expect, say, in replicable experiments. And even if we move, by the way, this boundary between history and, say, natural sciences actually rather recently was, how say, relaxed in many occasions. For example, I know people working, say, on evolution, like biological evolution, and of course there is kind of theoretical work, right, with the theory of evolution and stuff, but there is a lot of, and as far as I understand, of course, again, I'm not an expert, just heard something, a lot of empirical evidence of kind of new empirical evidence just coming from new methods, excavations, and new methods for whatever datings, with this stuff. And so it's very much a big part of this work constructs a kind of reconstruction, just what really happened on the earth, how life evolved. And so in a sense, that's close to history, right? Because facts are fundamentals. And of course, all the system of evidences, of proofs, if you claim something, you need to prove it. But that's not experiments, like, right? Like I have some experimental equipment and I push a button, it does something, and then I push again and does the same thing. It's nothing like this, right? So in that sense, this example of history, even if we're talking about like human history, it's I think relevant to this issue of say scientific knowledge. Of course, there is kind of part of history which concerns interpretations. There is some specifics which certainly not, how say, innate. There is this old term, it's called natural history. It's kind of outdated, not used, and that's basically history of natural worlds. You know, there was this, it's actually before Charles Darwin was famous French, I forgot his first name, Justin Buffon, who actually was a big name in what he did was natural history. His main book and subject is called Histoire naturelle. I think it was even translated something in Russian in 19th century something. So it's an important name, and in that sense, it's just example of something which is scientific and needs an evidence, but that kind of evidence is not based on, say, replicable experiments. It just give that example. But otherwise, it's of course very, how say, relevant and important subject by itself. So maybe some other people have something to add.
Aye.
Yes.
I thought we were discussing knowledge, just knowledge as it is, but now we're kind of moving into science, and I think we didn't actually like. I thought what we were going to say is discuss how knowledge is one thing and science is another thing, but now we're saying scientific knowledge, and
no, look, no, I'd rather look. I made this reservation, right, that not all knowledge is scientific, right? That could be some other sources of knowledge, no, like from everyday examples on from court. That, by the way, another very important place is, say, law juridical system. If, for example, the issue is whether such individuals, I don't know, killed another individual, right? So the establishing truth is crucially important, and at least in some cases, we may say that knowledge is obtained, right? That, for example, such and such events happened, and still it wouldn't be science. It would be kind of different setting. So we are making this reservation, but otherwise, of course, our subject is philosophy of science. So it's okay if we somehow focus on philosophy of science. We may also check whether what we say apply to other example, non-scientific example knowledge or not, but it's actually not just central for our class. Yeah, but otherwise, yeah, you're right. We are moving kind of to science, but that's okay. So within this framework philosophy of science, we discuss what is knowledge, just assuming that science produces knowledge, even if it doesn't produce all knowledge, right? It produces some knowledge, I think.
I also thought that we were talking about like personal knowledge, and personal knowledge, it's like it doesn't have to be true, like it can be false, and it's just how one person understands things, and it could be like anything. So it's like everything they know about world.
Yeah, that's actually a very important remark, right? actually the fact that knowledge actually refers, no, at least may refers to a person, right? That I know something, or you know something that I don't know, and there is also, you know, there is the subject epistemic logic. Then people try to, how say, to figure out and to construct kind of logic of knowledge. And then, of course, there is this kind of recursive situation. I know that you know that he knows, and so forth. Right. So, so yes, probably no. Now, you see what? When we asking question like that, like what is knowledge, right? Kind of very big question. There are different strategies, so to speak. And one strategy is somehow to figure out the best answer. But another strategy is somehow to analyze the concept, right? There is kind of intuition, as people say sometimes, linguistic intuition. There is a word, after all, knowledge, right? Which is used by different people in different ways, in different contexts. And when we are trying to answer that kind of question, gives kind of definition, we kind of trying to normalize that, right? But it may happen, and it does happen in many cases, that actually there are like different concepts of knowledge, right? That people just use the same word for kind of different purposes, for different things. And in such cases, it makes sense just distinguish, say, okay, we may call it something like individual personal knowledge or common knowledge, right? Kind of distinguish these things. So we should not expect that when we ask that kind of question, what is knowledge or what is being, or something, that there is a single answer, because our answer, no, I'm not even talking now about kind of competing views and different opinions, but just about the fact that the same word or the same kind of loose concept, right, may be specified into a family of concepts. So I think a really important part of your remark is that we should distinguish that, at least, right? The situation, as Kirill, when Kirill says it's what you say, knowledge is a representation of reality, right? And we say representationism kind of abstract. No, it may be concrete, like a book or something, right? But I think Kirill meant something replicable, so to speak, right? Something more abstract, so it may exist in different books, in different formulations, something more abstract. And that's also quite justified to talk about knowledge in that sense. But then we should simply distinguish between kind of individual knowledge, what a particular person knows or doesn't know, and that kind of abstracted, generalized knowledge, right? Which somehow we think exists on itself. No, we should not talk here exactly how it exists, but somehow we imagine that it's at least an abstract entity that some people may acquire. So we think in such context about knowledge independently of knower, of a person who knows, right? And such abstraction is quite justified and useful in many contexts, but in other contexts it becomes very important. You know, like in game theory, is kind of when people design different strategies, who knows what, some kind of secrecy, cryptography, and so forth. Here, of course, it's important. No, usually in epistemology, in such context, people talk about epistemic agent or epistemic agency, which may be by default kind of individual person, but maybe some collective body also, right? Or maybe even some, I don't know, extraterrestrial or some non-human animal in some very special context, right? So that's really important point. Okay.
Do we
Something
have
else?
to distinguish between knowledge and belief in we're using these
Yeah,
terms in
yeah.
their basic meaning, let's say? Well, I mean that if one person, well, let's say he or she is strongly religious person, so he or she may say, I believe in God. So is it belief or is it knowledge? Because for this person, this is, well, basically knowledge.
Yeah, that's very good
But
question.
is
It
it
actually
true
brings
that-
me to this very standard account that I'm just about to deliver. But perhaps there are some. Yeah. I thank you. I'll comment in a minute. But perhaps there is someone else who want to say something. No, okay. If not, exactly. So let me just tell you kind of dogmatically, kind of standard theory, which is pretty much standard. It's historically usually kind of brought back to Plato, philosopher Plato, but we are not going to study Plato exactly. Even it brought back to Plato for good reasons, and then many other older philosophers discussed that. But the idea is, okay, maybe I'm going to use a little bit of whiteboard. Try to. Yeah. So standard account, it's goes as. Sorry, I should connect my. So it goes as follows. It analyzes that concept of knowledge. Oh. Yes, I know what I should do. I should stop video because otherwise it goes very, very low. Okay. Let me try if it works. Yeah, somehow. So we have this knowledge. And so the standard analysis analyzes knowledge in terms of three further concepts. First is truth, right? So it assumes that knowledge is true. And that's, by the way, answering your question about God. So, no, I don't know if we take this. So I would put that way. If God exists, then one who believes that God exists may have that knowledge. We will see that this is necessary but not sufficient condition. But it is necessary, right? So that analysis excludes the situation that we may know something false. Okay. No, I don't know how much, if it's really objectionable. Are there any objection that something can be not true but still known? No, okay, presumably not. Let me just say it rather briefly, and then I actually tell you about critique of this account of knowledge and some objections. But let's just first say as it is, as it stands, right? So first idea that knowledge should be true, right? And second is actually relates to this point concerning individual versus. So second is that it should be believed, right? That it's not just true, because maybe some true proposition and which nobody believes in, right? People may simply never, how say, be unaware about that proposition, right? Or believe that it's false. I don't know what is could be an example, which would be not No, I don't know. No, many examples. I don't know. Many people believe that Alexei Navalny, that the claim that Alexei Navalny was poisoned by Russian government is false. There is such people, or there is people who say we don't know, right? And suppose it is true. So so people may believe that it's false and this is true, so they don't know that, right? Even if they believe it. Okay. So so first part of this analysis that knowledge should be true belief, right? That people should believe. Well, again, here it may be individual. By default, on that account, it's about individual. But people also talk about common knowledge, right? Which is shared. That's certain group of people, well, usually defined in terms of this recursion. For example, to have a common knowledge, say, between me and all of you, it just would mean that I know that you know, and you know that I know, and everybody of us knows that everybody knows, and all this recursion of this know modality is just how to say, holds. Okay, so that's called common knowledge. We all know that everybody knows. That's called common knowledge or shared knowledge. Okay, defined in terms of individual knowledge. Now, perhaps there could be some other approaches where individual knowledge is not considered as basic, and we may start with more abstract concept to begin with. But anyway, of course, some sort of belief is important, right? We should distinguish between simply true proposition and knowledge of that proposition, right? So knowledge is when what is necessary for knowledge that, say, an agent, let me say agent, no, absolutely believes in certain proposition, say P, say agent, say A, believes that that P and P is true, right? No, so now question is, in a sense, it's a question of convention, but tell me whether it would be sufficient for knowledge, or we may need something on the top of that. So let us assume that's necessary, but whether it is sufficient.
Maybe we need some form of transferability.
Some form of what?
Knowledge to be transferred in some form.
That's actually an important issue, but it's not a part of this account. No, actually, what is standardly account on the top of that, Kirill mentioned that, and who took the next, I already forgot, was, no, I think that most of you mentioned actually that. It's this, you refer to evidence, for example, right? To experiments and stuff like that. And a more general term is justification, right? So this completed account, which sometimes is just referred to JTB, JTB theory, right? Or account of knowledge, right? It just says that knowledge is justified through belief. No, that's indeed we may find even in Plato dialogues when he distinguishes these things and say okay, you may believe something for some contingent reasons, right? You may believe to authority, or you just may believe to your friend. And it may happen that what your friend told you and somehow persuaded you to believe, right? It's true, but it also may happen that's false. So the idea is here, it somehow call that situation when A believes in P and P is true, Plato call it true opinion. So the idea here is distinguish opinion, which is standard translation for Greek doxa, and for knowledge, Plato and every other Greek philosopher used episteme, which is probably science. So they wouldn't distinguish knowledge and science, unlike ourselves. But so the idea is that that's of course useful thing, true belief, right? It's somehow important, and it's better to believe what is true rather than believe what is false, right? But no, the idea is that there is something more to knowledge, at least in some cases, there is something better than that. And better is then we have certain, no, you call it evidence, I may call proof, or general term is justification, right? So so that's probably third condition. No, I put it in the first place, probably kind of, it's more logical, right? Even we say grammatically justify true belief, you may change the order and say A believes P. Okay, knowledge is something about belief, right? It's kind of special kind of belief. And second is a truth. That's of course very important. By the way, when Kirill said it's something to do with reality, that of course concerns the link between truth and reality. That's probably discussed next week, but I think it's rather obvious, right? That's is something real or not? Is it, say, poisoning of Alexei is a real fact, or someone lie, right? It's and that's question about reality, what really happened. So that's second point. But third point, which in a sense is kind of central, because it's kind of brings you from belief to truth. So logically, is J stands somehow between T and B, and that's no, usually it's expressed by saying A, this agent, right, is justified, or has some to believe that P. Okay, and this is a, no, I put it in a third place, but in a sense it's, I think, central. No, again, that's in a sense a matter of linguistic convention, right? In many cases, we may probably, in the common talks, we would, true belief would be enough. We would call something knowledge if it's true, and if it's believed by certain person or certain group of persons, and we would call it knowledge. But now what we are talking about, it's not actually, we are not talking about linguistics, right? We just use linguistic as a kind of tool, as a material to work with. All right. So that's kind of standard account of knowledge, and I would say it's actually applies even more specifically to scientific knowledge, even if we distinguish between scientific, non-scientific, because this justification in some form, it looks like really central in science, right? Because what we expect, at least what I expect anyway, from science is provide some justified evidence, justified claim, right? Which is not simply true, but somehow shows us that and shows us why it is true, right? And no, if we're going back to our example of coronavirus, for example, then what do you think? Again, how what you read about vaccines and stuff, how it is justified? How you would? The thing is that truth is not available by itself, right? It should somehow present itself, and that introduces this epistemic dimension, right? So our issue is not just being true or false, but to know that something is true or false, and to know that something is true or false according to this account is justifications, matter of justification, is whether or not something is justified. Yes. So what your thoughts, how is justified or not justified, what you hope to know, at least, right? We should be now more careful about words like know about, say, coronavirus.
I'm afraid I don't really get what justification means. So, is it to explain why something is true? So to give reason behind knowledge, or is it
or reason or evidence? Yeah, I should say that there is no so far a really standard and actually even good theory of justification. Some people, and I'm kind of working with, just think it's really big loss of logic as it's developed through 20th century, because there are a lot of developments in logic and stuff, but this issue of justification was a little bit left aside. No, look, if we don't try to give most general definition, which is good for all cases, right? But just want to give some examples. No, I would give a couple of examples, right? So one is, say, from mathematics, for example, do you know like Pythagorean theorem? Yeah, what is Pythagorean theorem? How do you know it?
I can't explain it in English. It's about a triangle, and
yeah, it's about triangle. Okay, the square of two sides equal to square third side of hypotenuse, about actually right angle triangle, right? But thing is that if I just asking, and why it's the case, why you believe that this is true, right? Can you explain why you believe that? Yeah. No, I can write it in modern form, like AC square plus BC square equals AB square, right? That's not something self-evident, right? So what do you mean you know that?
can't we prove it? Like when if we do calculate that for
No, yeah,
right side
okay. I
of
will not ask you prove it now. Even I ask on my mathematical course all the time. Yeah, exactly, exactly. But that's the difference, right? If you say I know what it is, that's a simple formula. That's at best true belief, right? It's at best true belief. But if we want to use this verb know and concept of knowledge in kind of deeper sense, in a stronger sense, right? then you say, yeah, to know it means to know its proof, how to prove it. And when you prove it, what really happens? You kind of convince yourself, right? It's not, otherwise you rather repeat it because you are told by teacher, and the kind of social role of teacher is to tell you truth, right? Or so you are told. And so that's you rely on authority, right? There is someone, and then there is this simple training that if you saying that, you are given good mark, and otherwise you get bad mark. And if I get good mark, your parents, I don't know, buy you ice cream, otherwise they don't. So there is all this trainings, but the idea is behind this GTB, right? Somehow distinguish this kind of just training from something different, and that's different is to have evidence. And okay, that theorem is a little bit, actually there is another theorem which may be kind of proven, at least given an argument, supporting argument. You know that sum of internal angles equals two right angles, right? And this is because these angles are equal. These are, if I continue this a little bit like that, these are equal, say, gamma, right? Alpha here and beta here, right? So I have two right angles. So this construction somehow provides an evidence. By the way, that's important. It's reproducible in a sense. That's interesting topic. That how this construction is reproducible. It's not exactly like reproducible physical experiments, but it's something of that sort, right? That everyone needs to reproduce this construction in her own mind and by hands, and that's of course very so that is a kind of justification, right? Another sort of justification, it's all sort of say experiments, exactly, just giving an evidence of something, like for example, I mentioned this paleontology, right? Science which studies history of life on Earth, and of course, all these material evidence, like archaic bones, whatever, they count as evidences, right? And there is very complicated and subtle issue, which evidence support which propositions, and how to use evidences to construct your argument, to support your claim, and so forth, right? But so anyhow, that constitutes justification, right? Or we may, if we talk about, say, physical theories, one of relatively recent, I think, was 2017, these gravitation waves were first detected. And this is a great empirical evidence in favor of general theory of relativity, which I already mentioned today, right? They were kind of predicted, theoretically, you know, understood, and you know, but empirically observed only recently. And of course, observation in that case is something much more complicated than say just observation of stars with the astrolabe. It involves a lot of equipment, so you can see them, of course, but anyway, it constitutes empirical evidence, and so all that qualifies as a justification of sort, right? But what is really general theory of justification, probably we still don't know. Another is, as I already mentioned, a court, right? A court, and then of course, no, by the way, in a court, scientific evidences may also matter in many cases, right? Like poisoning with advanced complicated substances developed for exactly for that purpose, right? So here scientific evidence somehow goes along with kind of juridical evidence, right? It may be used in a court. So of course that's broader than just science. But anyway, no, so compute that theory, that's very standard, right? That it distinguishes, to summarize, between true belief and justified true belief, and whatever justification is, it needs to be there, all right, to qualify for knowledge in that stronger sense. And I personally find it really, really important, and also practically important in the situation when we have so many information, right? And information is so easily available via internet, and that's great thing, of course. But I think we really have a big open problem with finding justifications, right? And in many cases, we just obliged to rely to authority to believe someone, maybe some institution. Like I talked about the Sputnik vaccine, right? It's a vaccine. It's has been published a paper, okay, referred to this British reputable old medical journal and New York Times. And in a sense, it does make sense, right? Because it's kind of authorities. But it's not enough, of course, right? It's still authority. It just simply means that I believe certain sources and disbelieve certain other sources, but it's not justification properly, right? I cannot see it my eyes. And what can be done? Of course, it's also, by the way, if we talk about modern science, I'm not sure, probably you know more than me how it works, say, in cognitive science today, but if we talk something like theoretical physics, right? It's complicated because if you say you have huge equipment or some big data obtained from telescopes, how you can check them, right? How you may be sure that data which come to your computer are really obtained from this telescope, but not faked something in between, and so forth and so forth. And here I think there is huge open problem, and both theoretical, because there is no good logical approach to that, and of course practical, right? And that's something that is important in many occasions. Now, just I would briefly mention, as I promised, some limitation of this thing, right? And one limitation is that just observe that knowledge, defined according to this JTB theory, is propositional knowledge, right? So what can be possibly true is a proposition, right? No, it's almost, it's maybe we may discuss a little bit more extensively next week. Proposition in a logical sense. По-русски говорят, кстати, высказывание. Ну так, традиционно. And again, there is no definition because it's very much basic term in logic, but roughly proposition is a truth bearer. It's what bears truth value. It's what can be possibly true or can be false, or can be probably something in between truth and false. There are different approaches, but at least when we say something is true, is a proposition. No, at least this is kind of, again, restriction of language, because otherwise we may talk about like true, I don't know, true man or true whatever, not proposition, right? Even people say about true theory, that's already less clear what is meant exactly. But standard account that what bears this truth value is a proposition. Yes, and so when we talk about belief in this context, is about proposition. By the way, you mentioned belief in God, and that's less clear. When I believe in God, do I believe in a proposition, kind of God exists, or it's something else? Arguably, it does not reduce to proposition, right? so all this theory is based on the assumption that knowledge is propositional, while there is actually observation and some argumentation that there are different kinds of knowledge which is not propositional, and that's different kind of knowledge often is called operation knowledge or knowledge how. Knowledge how, right? If you know how ride a bicycle, or you know how to prove Pythagoras theorem, right? It's not a proposition. It's a different kind of knowledge. Is you may say it's all irrelevant. Truth is irrelevant to knowing how. No, at least it's not relevant directly, right? And so that theory simply doesn't cover this knowing how. And I think it's actually important important loss because when we talk about justification, it's very much about knowing how, right? How to justify, how to prove a theorem, how to perform experiment that provide an evidence, and so forth. So knowing how is, in that sense, somehow is a part of the same package of knowledge, but here it's kind of hidden, right? Even how to make logical inferences, right? How to reason logically. It's all about knowing how, and not about knowing that something is true, right? Right? And it's maybe not so much about belief, right? Knowing how, right? Probably belief. Not belief again is probably a broader term. Not all beliefs, arguably, is propositional belief. So there are all that kind of reservations about this theory, and there is a more that's what I wanted to show you, but now I probably just give you this paper to your homework, because it's very kind of classical paper of 1963, so it's kind of ancient. Let me, I can send you in the chat, of course, okay? It's written by American philosopher still alive, called Edmund Gettier. And it has 4 pages. It's very short, but it produced a huge discussion, a huge literature. And this philosopher actually didn't produce much about this paper, but that paper made him name in history of philosophy. Anyway, just 4 pages written when he was a young man. No, that's a bit strange. That's something about sociology of philosophy in America, I think. But anyway, it's good paper. Good paper. It's certainly worth reading. I'm sorry. Yeah, just let me. Oh, sorry. Mm-hmm. Yeah, here it is. Right. So he produced kind of commonsensical counterexamples. Right. He attempted to show that could be a situation when we have true belief. Right. Someone believes in something which is true, and we arguably have justification, but still, commonsensically speaking, we don't have knowledge. We wouldn't want to qualify that as knowledge. Yeah, that's about proposition. That's different kind of critique. It's just not pointing to something that we would also like to call knowledge and which is of different sort, like knowledge how, right? It's rather for saying that these three conditions are not sufficient, right? They may be necessary, but not sufficient. So we may something which looks like justified true belief, but still is not knowledge, right? And that's very widely discussed. Yes, but I think we should we should conclude, right? Because you have very soon your next class. Did you get it?
Да.
Мгм. Да, ну давайте все, вам уже вас надо отпускать, чтобы вы хоть чуть-чуть вздохнули перед следующим занятием. Слушайте, я единственное, еще вот нам надо, да, договориться, куда складывать какие-то, вот где нам обмениваться файлами. Знаете, давайте все-таки я действительно сделаю директорию, но я вам скажу еще причину, почему я не хочу на этот самый. Ну, там у меня некоторые книжки, они не все с правильным копирайтом. То есть я поделюсь, но я не хочу выкладывать на этот университетский аккаунт, чтобы если там, не знаю, кто-нибудь скажет, что я выложил в открытый доступ. Ну, он не совсем открытый, но как в таком случае университет ответственный. В общем, я просто это выложу в свой как бы личный ящик и дам вам доступ. Я, может, тогда, ну, вот этот доступ я, может, тогда просто через вот этот MS Teams вам пришлю ссылочку. Хотя там, по-моему, знаете как, там надо... То есть я тоже должен внести туда ваши мейлы.
А у нас есть общая почта групповая. Может быть, ее использовать?
Давайте. А скиньте мне ее тогда тоже сейчас в чат. Я вот... У меня такой нету, не было пока. То есть вы ее все
Не
получаете,
знаю,
да?
коллеги, вам так удобно будет, нет?
Ага.
А, ну очень хорошо. То есть ее сразу вот все типа получают, да?
Вот я сейчас еще раз скинула личную почту, чтобы меня в Teams можно было добавить. Не
Да, Таня, я не забыл. Я вот сейчас обязательно
Хорошо.
добавлю, вот буквально через минуту, когда мы закончим.
Да.
Да. Спасибо, что напомнил. Да, ну, так, а я жду, что мне кто-то скинет вот эту общую. То есть вы ее все типа проверяете, да?
Ну, вроде как.
Да.
Ага. Не, ну давайте, это действительно тогда удобнее будет. Подождите. Нет, а вы сможете, если я под эту почту сделаю вот ящик на Google диске, что вы все, сможете все туда заходить тогда?
Да, у нас у всех есть доступ к ней.
Да?
Мгм.
Ну, попробуем. В общем, если это вдруг не будет... Да, давайте тогда я так и сделаю. То есть я как бы пошерю вот на эту почту, вы все получите, и, значит, у вас будет доступ в эту папку, так?
Должно быть так.
Ну, давайте, да. И тогда, ну, сейчас сохраните на свой диск на всякий случай. Ну, я туда это тоже выложу. И вот всю литературу, которой мы будем пользоваться, я тогда буду тоже потихоньку туда выкладывать по мере необходимости. Так. Да, ну, видите, даже как-то быстрее это время прошло, чем я вот думал. Да, ну вот мы эту проблему демаркации, собственно, не совсем обсудили. Ну, я думаю, мы к ней как-то вернемся постепенно. Ну, сейчас я, подождите, покажусь. Ага. Так. Ну, если какие-то есть тоже срочные вопросы или что-то. Еще раз я говорю, у меня вот эти часы, если кто-то хочет со мной там более индивидуально общаться, пожалуйста. Ну, если нет, тогда я с вами прощаюсь
А
до
я бы
следующей
сейчас на
недели.
5 минут буквально осталось.
Да, пожалуйста.
Спросить про тему. Ну,
Про тему
Да.
этого самого хотите обсудить. Ну, давайте тогда сейчас мы остальных отпустим, да? Или, может, еще кто-то что-то хочет обсудить? То есть речь идет о теме вот вашей работы, да?
Да.
Отлично, сейчас прямо, да, так обсудим. Мгм. Ну, хорошо, тогда всем до свидания, и вот с Анной мы еще сейчас пообщаемся. Я всех вот тоже призываю прямо как можно раньше это придумать чего-нибудь. Только еще раз я говорю, вы смотрите прям вот на весь наш силабус, ну или даже куда-то за пределы силабуса, потому что, ну вот сейчас мы вот начали, например, вот эту тему обсуждать, в следующий раз там тоже такие с логикой связанные вещи пойдут, но это не значит, что вы все должны именно вот под это выбрать свои темы, можете совершенно другие. Еще раз я говорю, вот коротенькое замечание, просто есть, конечно, вот такая специфическая философская тематика, связанная именно с когнитивными науками. Ну, видите, я ее вот не включил сознательно как бы вот в это наше общее расписание, но как раз вот надеюсь, что тем, кому из вас это интересно, вы сами вот эти темы поднимете, и мы уже будем вот по ним, как сказать, работать вот в этой второй части. Так что если кто-то вот хочет именно найти тему, связанную с когнитивными исследованиями, ну тоже можете посоветовать со мной, если сразу. Ну, в общем, думайте и действительно вот не откладывайте это дело. Чем быстрее начнете, тем лучше. Договорились? Хорошо, тогда до свидания всем, вот кроме Анны. Ага.
Спасибо, до свидания.
До свидания.
До свидания.
До свидания.
До свидания, спасибо.
Ага, вот у меня такой вопрос, можно было бы такую тему посмотреть? Я в прошлом семестре тоже смотрела на Лизу Барретт с ее теорией конструирования эмоций, да, то есть она говорит, что эмоции это как бы…
Чего-то как будто слышал.
Она книжка
Может,
у нее там такая недавно.
Может быть, что от студентов тоже прошлого года.
Да, то есть там пару лет назад вышла книжка. Вот, у нее там прям своя теория. Я потом посмотрела еще Вишбицкую Анну, у нее тоже как бы, как вот эмоция, понятие, это конструируется. Она говорит, что, например, там страх или там какие-то, ну, со страхом мне сложнее, конечно.
Как еще раз ее, дайте я наберу, Лиза?
Лиза Барретт. С двумя Р.
Барретт?
Да, 2 Р, 2 Т.
Ага. Так, Лиза Фелдман Барретт, нейросcience.
Да, и у Вишбицкой я тоже видела, то есть там, оказывается, такие вот вообще идут баталии по поводу того, что существуют эмоции или нет, там куча всяких подходов, вот, и я вот в связи с этим полезла смотреть, и там такие, ну, была статья, тоже смотрела, вот это субъективные, ну, как бы существующие вещи объективные и субъективно существующие. И как бы вот по этой статье было вообще, получается, что объективно существуют только, ну, типа, вещества, например, вода, там, да, или какой-нибудь там алмаз, вот такие вещи, остальное как бы все зависит от как бы субъективного. Я нашла специально сейчас еще статью, например, там тоже вот как бы рассматривается подход к эмоциям. Так.
Ну, понимаете, вот здесь как, нет, все это, так сказать, страшно интересно, я вот в этом смысле не сомневаюсь, но у меня, значит, небольшое вот какое, так сказать, сомнение, в каком смысле, понимаете, ну вот я смотрю, вот это и Вишбицкая, ну, про которую я, да, что слышал, и вот это вот Барретт, ну, как бы это не вот философия, да, ну, еще раз я говорю, я не то, что я хочу как-то вот строго к этому относиться, ну, то есть это вот, подождите, вот кто она, там, себя, она как описывает академически?
Психолог, наверное. Психолог, science, вот это вот все. Ну, тоже, я, смотрите, да, как бы я вот хочу как раз посоветовать, то есть я не конкретно про них хочу, да, например, вот, а именно взять и попробовать понять вот это объективное, объективно существующее, да, но можно провести какую-то параллель.
Ну да, то есть вот если вы как бы от этого оттолкнетесь и вот немножко так вопрос вот поставите более философски, так сказать,
да? Да. То есть вот это вот, что такое субъективно, что такое объективно существующее, да, вот мы почленили реальность. Как бы. Вот что-то, вот может вы меня как куда-то как-то…
Да, вот это…
Что мне почитать? Ну я потому что удивилась, это что я прочитала, я такая, а что вообще тогда существует, кроме вещества, кроме химических элементов? У меня такой возник вопрос.
Вот. Я просто заранее могу сказать, по крайней мере, вот в таком мейнстриме философском, это вот как раз Квайн, который он принял, вот такая идея, что там можно существовать в каких-то разных смыслах, ну, кстати, вот то, что Аристотель как раз писал, да, что вот существование, оно, так сказать, по-разному. Одно существует как там субстанция, другое как свойство и так далее. Она как бы не популярна, то есть вот считается, ну, то есть это некая догма, которую может и иметь смысл поколебать, но это как всегда, что если вот ну, что-то существует или не существует, вот как бы без дураков.
Мгм.
Каких-то разных смыслов. Вот. Но другое дело, что там могут существовать какие-то фикции, и вот это объективно и субъективно-то... Нет, я даже знаю, вот там одна книжка даже, по-моему, есть в списке, который к этому относится.
Мгм.
Это вот такой автор Томас Нагель. Ну, кстати, может, вы его
Мгм.
знаете вот по
Ну да,
всякому, да?
там это про летучую мышь, которая.
Да, но тут только да, вот тут другую там я книжку написал, которая называется View from Nowhere. Вот как раз как бы такой вот про научную объективность и про
Мгм.
научный реализм на самом
Мгм.
деле. И вот мне кажется, хотя это не то, что прямо такая совсем свежая литература, но вот мне кажется, это одно из лучших, что на эту тему написано.
Мгм. Так,
Вот.
посмотрю тогда.
Да, вот можно посмотреть туда. Ну, еще можно.
Я
Да,
тоже смотрю, например, вот есть Земля, да, например, планета, из нее растет дерево. Как бы это же мы проводим границу между деревом и землей, да, то есть, по сути, это же оно слившееся, как бы дерево прикреплено к земле, к планете, да, то есть, как бы, ну, животное бежит, оно тоже ест все время. Вот какой-то я видела пример, что
Нет, а чем камни в этом смысле лучше в этот стран? Нет, ну окей, можно как сказать вот все, что мы вообще как-то обозначаем, да, ну вот более-менее такая кантианская позиция, что это все вот как бы наши концепты, наша голова, пространство, время, это вот все.
Вот, а может,
вот.
есть какие-то, да, категории, которые...
А чем камни-то лучше? Ну тогда камни это тоже, мы тоже их категоризуем вот как камни. Почему камни существуют, а ежики нет? Вот это вот не понимаю.
Да, ну, может быть и так. То есть какие-то химические вещества существуют. Или вот что-то.
Ну да.
Как
Нет, ну
лес.
такой контраргумент. Нет, ну то, что все, что мы вообще описываем, да, вот это все вот какое-то имеет такое человеческое измерение.
Может быть, да, суть именно в оценке, да, что для меня это имеет какой-то смысл, и это не универсальный смысл вот в этом есть, да, какой-то, а вот то, что, например, эмоция, да, или вот этот какой-то, может быть, камень. Если для всех это одинаково, то это универсальное, может быть, а когда это для, там, ну, для меня...
Это вот вопрос как бы объективного и субъективного, да, вот здесь это немножко тоже грани, вот что такое объективное, субъективное и реальное, да, вот объективное это тоже не то же самое, что реальное. Здесь вот надо.
Вот.
Ну вот как по Канту вся наука, она объективна, потому что вот по тем же самым концептам она устроена, но тоже вот он там называл что-то вещь в себе, что-то такое отдельное, куда у нас нет доступа. Но, с одной стороны, такие аргументы вот могут быть, звучать убедительно, но критика их такая простая, да, стоит в том, что ну, тогда либо мы должны вообще вот этот вопрос, что-то существует или не существует, считать ну, какой-то бессмысленной, да, какой-то пустой категории. Ну, вроде это плохо. Тогда как бы и с истиной, тогда вот что мы называем истиной и ложью тоже. То есть мы как бы легко скатываемся в такую очень скептическую позицию из этого, да. А скептическая позиция, ну, как бы она такая тривиальная, тогда как anything goes, тогда мы вообще ничего не умеем различать, ни истину, ни ложь, там, ни хорошо, ни плохо, ну и как бы это очень просто.
Но если мы вернемся
неинтересно,
к более неоднозначным вещам, чем камень, например, да, вот то, что мы чем занимаемся, изучением там сознания, да, кто-то говорит, что там, что такое сознание, придумали какое-то слово и непонятно, что им называют, да, или вот эти эмоции, которые, ну, то есть вот здесь возникает как раз вот это неоднозначность уже, кто что под этим понимает, то есть, да, какие-то...
Конечно, здесь всегда
вот,
много.
Вот что-то вот в эту сторону я бы хотела.
Нет, ну давайте, вот, ну просто, я думаю, что тут тоже просто много всякой вот такой литературы. Ну, Нагель это, конечно, что-то такое более общее, да, то, что вот не относится так специфически к каким-то... Есть какие-то вещи вот более близкие там ко всякой нейронауке, но как бы вот остающиеся в философии.
Я даже не знаю, как это классифицируются, вот эти подходы вообще там, кто там, ну, то есть я не знаю, откуда как бы вот, я наткнулась на это субъективное, например, объективно существующее. А как бы куда дальше?
Не, ну смотрите, ну попробуйте вот как бы разобраться немножко в этой теме, ну я насколько смогу, помогу, хотя вот я говорю, это не моя такая вот конкретная там научная специальность, ну, философская, что ли, специальность, но я уже так потихоньку тоже с этим разбираюсь, поскольку многие... И, ну, начните вы хотя бы вот с этой Стэнфордской энциклопедии. Она, по крайней мере, все время обновляется, да, ну, погуглите там что-то. Объективное, субъективное, и там будет какая-то литература. Ну, все вы, конечно, не прочитаете, но какие-то будут, так сказать, какие-то будут заходы. Ну, вот. Ну, и напишите мне, вот даже, знаете, когда вы напишете, там даже несколько фраз, от этого проще будет отталкиваться, чем...
Так, хорошо, я посмотрю тогда Нагеля и энциклопедию, может, у меня какая-то что-то начнет какая структура формироваться.
Да.
Да,
Ну,
ну,
отлично.
да, посмотрим, как там, да, будет получаться.
Хорошо.
Спасибо большое.
Пожалуйста. Да, слушайте, ну посмотрите эту, я как-то, не помню, забыл это сказать, чтобы вы эту статью Гитье все-таки посмотрите, она
Что
такая...
за статья Гитье? Подождите, я что-то пропустила.
Вот то, что я сейчас по чату прислал.
Ага, хорошо.
Ну,
Да.
она как бы немножко не про науку на самом деле, но вот мне как-то кажется, что вот этот весь вопрос про обоснование, он такой очень важный.
Да,
что-
хорошо.
Вот.
Все,
Хорошо. Ну, все, тогда договорились.
Да, посмотрим.
До свидания, до следующей пятницы.